In an unexpected turn of events, Mark Zuckerberg, the tech mogul behind Facebook, decided to step outside his usual billionaire persona for a social experiment. Disguising himself as a homeless man, he ventured into the heart of the city, seeking to experience life from a perspective few could imagine. But what followed shocked not only him but everyone who witnessed it. After being swiftly kicked out of a high-end restaurant, no one could have predicted the chain of events that would unfold, sparking a wave of reactions that left the public in disbelief. As Mark wandered the bustling streets in his carefully crafted disguise, he was no longer the CEO of a global empire. He was just another man in ragged clothes, a scruffy beard, and a worn-out backpack. He had chosen this path intentionally, hoping to get a sense of how the world treated those who lived on the margins of society. The sharp contrast between his true identity and the reality he was now facing was stark. The restaurant he chose for his first test was a trendy spot known for its upscale clientele and refined ambiance. Mark had hoped to blend in, just long enough to see how people would react to a homeless person attempting to dine there. What he didn't expect, however, was the immediate hostility from the staff. "Sir, I'm afraid we can't serve you here," a stern waiter said, looking down at him with clear disdain. "We have a strict dress code, and you'll need to leave." Mark was stunned. In that brief moment, he saw firsthand the divide between the world of the privileged and those struggling to survive. He didn't fight back, instead choosing to calmly stand up, nod, and make his way to the door. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and for a moment, Mark stood outside, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was a man who had everything. Yet, for the first time, he felt invisible, cast aside because of his outward appearance. But that wasn't the end of the story. As he stood there, pondering the harsh reality of how people viewed him, a young woman approached. Her face was filled with concern, and without hesitation, she offered him a warm smile. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice kind. Mark, still in character, nodded, though he was a bit taken aback by her kindness. "Here," she said, handing him a folded $100 bill. "I don't know what's going on, but you shouldn't have to feel like that." Mark was moved, but he had more in mind than just playing the part of a homeless man. He wanted to see if his experiment could make a difference, if he could inspire a change in how society viewed the homeless. He thanked the woman, pocketed the money, and began to walk away. But before he could get too far, something unexpected happened. A group of people, who had been sitting nearby, had witnessed the entire exchange. They approached him, offering their own forms of help, food, clothes, and even heartfelt words of encouragement. Word spread quickly, and in less than an hour, a small crowd had gathered. What started as a simple social experiment turned into a powerful moment of connection. Mark was overwhelmed by the genuine concern he received from strangers. While he had expected judgment, he had not anticipated compassion in such abundance. In the days that followed, the story of the homeless Mark Zuckerberg made its way into the media. People were shocked, not just by his experiment, but by the reaction of the public. It raised a bigger question: how often do we judge based on appearances? And how often do we fail to see the humanity in others? But the real shock came when Mark revealed his true identity. The world reacted with a mix of admiration and outrage. Some praised him for his boldness, while others criticized him for exploiting the homeless experience. The debate raged on, but one thing was clear: the social experiment had struck a nerve. Mark had set out to learn something profound about human nature, but in doing so, he had sparked a global conversation, one that would challenge people to rethink their perceptions and treatment of the less fortunate. And while the experiment had ended, its impact would continue to reverberate for much longer. As the days passed, Mark's social experiment became the subject of heated discussions across social media, news outlets, and in living rooms around the world. Some hailed him as a visionary, praising his bold approach to raising awareness about homelessness and the stark social divides that often go unnoticed. Others were quick to accuse him of being out of touch, exploiting the struggles of others for the sake of publicity. But Mark wasn't content with just stirring up controversy. His goal had always been to learn, to spark a shift in the way society viewed the homeless. And though the immediate reactions were mixed, he realized that this moment had opened a door, a door to deeper questions and conversations about empathy, privilege, and inequality. To continue his journey of understanding, Mark began reaching out to homeless shelters, charitable organizations, and advocacy groups. He sought the guidance of those who had spent years working with vulnerable populations, eager to hear their perspectives on the issues he had witnessed. What he learned surprised him. Homelessness wasn't just about a lack of shelter. It was about a lack of dignity, respect, and the belief that someone cared. Armed with this new knowledge, Mark took action. He used his platform to raise awareness for these causes, not just with his usual marketing prowess but by connecting with those who had been through the experience of homelessness themselves. He began investing in programs that provided job training, mental health services, and housing support, initiatives that not only helped people survive but helped them rebuild their lives with dignity. However, the backlash still lingered. Critics continued to argue that Mark's stunt was nothing more than a publicity grab. While some of his supporters began to question his true intentions, was he truly invested in making a difference? Or was he just looking for a way to improve his image? Despite the mixed reactions, Mark remained determined to show that he had learned from his mistake. He wasn't just going to stop at a single experiment, he was committed to using his platform for good. A pivotal moment came when Mark visited a homeless shelter in San Francisco, one of the largest in the country. There, he met individuals who had spent years living on the streets, their lives shaped by hardship, addiction, and the absence of support. Listening to their stories, Mark was deeply moved. He realized that homelessness was far more complex than he had ever imagined. But there was one conversation that stood out among the rest. An older man, who had been homeless for over 2 decades, shared his thoughts with Mark. "You know," he said, "you've got power, you've got influence, but it's not just about giving money. It's about giving people the opportunity to feel like they matter." That moment stuck with Mark. He had always known that his wealth and position allowed him to make a difference. But now, he understood that it wasn't enough to simply throw money at the problem. What people needed more than anything was a chance to feel seen, to feel human again. Mark's journey was no longer just about proving a point or seeking redemption. It was about genuinely making an impact, not through grand gestures but through consistent action. He dedicated himself to visiting shelters, meeting with lawmakers, and creating partnerships between tech companies and nonprofit organizations to tackle homelessness in innovative ways. His efforts went beyond donations. He sought to build lasting solutions. Still, as he continued to navigate this new world, Mark found that change was never easy. There were constant hurdles, political resistance, public skepticism, and the difficulty of translating empathy into effective policy. But each challenge only strengthened his resolve. The experiment he had once set out to perform had transformed into a lifelong commitment, one that would continue to evolve as he learned more about the real world and its many complexities. Months passed, and the media's focus on Mark's original experiment faded, but its underlying message persisted. The world had seen him not as the untouchable billionaire he was but as a man trying to make a meaningful difference. And though his path was far from perfect, Mark understood that sometimes the most profound change comes not from perfection, but from the willingness to take risks, learn from mistakes, and try again. And in the quiet moments, when he walked through the streets, away from the cameras and attention, he would remember the faces of those he met, people who had nothing, yet had shared everything with him. He knew that this journey was only just beginning. As Mark delved deeper into his mission to help the homeless, he realized that the road ahead would not be as simple as he'd hoped. The complexities of homelessness, compounded by systemic issues like mental health, addiction, and the lack of affordable housing, required more than just charitable acts. It required long-term strategies and a paradigm shift in the way society viewed those struggling in the margins. One day, Mark attended a meeting with a group of city officials, social workers, and experts in homelessness. The room was filled with tension. Everyone was acutely aware that despite decades of efforts, homelessness continued to rise in major cities across the country. As the meeting wore on, a woman who had been living on the streets for years stood up to speak. She introduced herself as Clara, and her words struck a chord in the room. "I've lived through things you can't imagine," Clara said, her voice raw but steady. "I was a mother, a daughter, a sister. Now, I'm a statistic, just one more person that everyone ignores. You can give me food. You can give me shelter. But none of that matters if you don't give me a chance to feel like I'm worth something again. Mark sat in silence as Clarice's words echoed in his mind. He had heard the numbers, the statistics about homelessness, the poverty rates, the growing gaps in access to mental health care. But hearing Clarice speak, so directly and with such vulnerability, reminded him that the issues were not just statistics. They were real people with real lives and untold stories. Clarice's life was a testament to the broken systems that had failed her, and so many others like her. As the meeting adjourned, Mark knew he couldn't just be another voice in a room full of people who talked about solutions. He needed to act, to take his role as a tech billionaire and social influencer beyond just offering donations. He needed to create something that could reshape the entire conversation about homelessness. He went back to his team, determined to work with other tech giants, nonprofit organizations, and government officials to create an innovative approach, a comprehensive platform where people in need could not only access immediate services but also gain the tools to rebuild their lives. This platform would combine technology with social services, providing resources for mental health care, job training, and affordable housing. Mark envisioned it as a bridge that would connect the resources people needed with the people who could provide them. But getting this idea off the ground was far from easy. Mark's efforts were met with resistance from many quarters, politicians who didn't see the value of collaborating with tech companies, social advocates who feared corporate interests would overshadow the needs of the homeless, and even some within his own team who questioned whether this was the right approach. Despite the challenges, Mark's resolve didn't waver. He knew that the solution wasn't simple, but it was necessary. In the meantime, Mark continued to meet with individuals affected by homelessness, listening to their stories and experiences. One encounter with a man named Alex deeply impacted him. Alex had once been a successful architect, but after a series of personal and financial setbacks, he found himself living on the streets. "I never thought it would happen to me," Alex said, looking at Mark with weary eyes. "One day you have everything, and the next, it's all gone. But the hardest part isn't losing everything, it's feeling like no one sees you anymore." Mark felt the weight of Alex's words. He realized that the emotional toll of homelessness was far more damaging than the physical hardships. It wasn't just about having a roof over your head, it was about being invisible, forgotten, and dismissed by society. This insight became a driving force behind Mark's next steps. The platform he envisioned would not only provide services but would also be a space where people could share their stories, gain a sense of dignity, and feel seen. Months passed, and slowly but surely, the platform began to take shape. Mark worked tirelessly to integrate innovative technologies like AI to match people with resources, virtual counseling, and job opportunities. The platform also aimed to break down the stigma around homelessness by creating a space where success stories could be highlighted, giving those who had overcome the odds a voice. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a bold, new attempt to bridge the gap between the wealthy and the homeless, between the privileged and the invisible. The moment of truth came when the platform was finally ready to launch. Mark stood before a crowd of philanthropists, tech innovators, and policymakers, ready to unveil what he hoped would be the future of social welfare. There was nervous anticipation in the air, but as Mark took the stage, he spoke with conviction. "This platform isn't just about helping people," he said, "it's about recognizing that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserves a chance to rebuild. We're not just giving people a handout, we're giving them an opportunity to restore their dignity." As the crowd applauded, Mark felt a surge of hope. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey, one filled with obstacles, criticism, and setbacks. But he also knew that the experiment he had started with a simple disguise had now evolved into something far bigger, a movement that could change the lives of millions. But as Mark looked out over the audience, he understood something else too. No matter how much technology advanced or how many resources were put into the cause, the real work wasn't about building apps or platforms. It was about building empathy and breaking down the barriers that separated people from one another. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. As the months rolled on, Mark's platform began to gain traction, and stories of transformation began to surface. People who had once been homeless found new opportunities through job training programs, mental health support, and affordable housing initiatives. Mark, now fully immersed in the cause, began to witness firsthand the profound impact that even small acts of support could have on someone's life. However, as much as the platform had grown, Mark realized that true change was always more complicated than technology alone could offer. One rainy evening, Mark sat in his office, staring at a screen filled with data showing the progress of the platform. He saw countless success stories, people who had gone from living on the streets to becoming productive members of society. Yet, there was still so much work to be done. The sheer scale of homelessness was overwhelming, and no matter how many initiatives were launched, the numbers kept climbing. That evening, his phone rang. It was Clara, the woman who had spoken so passionately at the meeting months ago. Mark had kept in touch with her over the course of his journey, and her words had stayed with him since that first conversation. "Mark," Clara said, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to say, thank you. You're doing more than anyone else ever did for us. But it's not just the platform, it's the fact that you're showing people like me that we matter." Mark paused, hearing the sincerity in her voice. "You've been part of this journey too, Clara," he replied, a feeling of warmth filling him. "I couldn't have done any of this without people like you sharing your story." Clara chuckled softly. "Well, I'm not the one who built a platform or got the tech world to pay attention. But you've done something more important. You've opened people's eyes. You've shown them that we're not invisible." It was at that moment that Mark realized how far he had come, from a man seeking answers to a global tech entrepreneur who had transformed his approach to business and empathy. The realization weighed heavily on him, but it was also empowering. He had started this journey with a social experiment, disguised as a homeless man. But now, he understood that the true purpose was to elevate the voices and experiences of those who had been left behind. In the final stages of refining the platform, Mark made the decision to shift the focus from just providing services to advocating for lasting policy changes. He collaborated with lawmakers, urban planners, and social experts to push for structural reforms in housing, mental health care, and welfare systems. The work was grueling, and progress was slow, but it was clear that Mark's efforts were making waves, starting to influence policy at a national level. And then came the moment that Mark had both dreaded and longed for. The culmination of his work was a national conference on homelessness, where he was invited to speak alongside some of the most influential figures in social change. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the audience, Mark realized that his journey had come full circle. He had gone from the man who sought answers to the one now providing them. "Homelessness isn't just a matter of lack," Mark began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a matter of invisibility. When we fail to see the people behind the statistics, we lose a part of our humanity. But we have the power, all of us, to change that, and it starts with seeing each other, really seeing each other." The crowd fell silent, listening to his words with rapt attention. And as Mark finished speaking, he knew that the impact of his journey would last far beyond the platform he had built. It wasn't the app, the technology, or even the policies that would truly make a difference. It was the willingness of people to see others as equals, to understand that everyone has a story and a right to dignity, no matter their circumstances. Months later, as Mark walked through the streets again, this time not in disguise but as himself, he passed by those same faces. The ones who had been invisible to him before. But now, Mark saw them, not just as statistics or problems to be solved, but as human beings, each with their own life story, dreams, and struggles. Mark's journey had changed him. He was no longer just a tech mogul, he had become a true advocate for change. And as he continued to support, push for policy reform, and work alongside those who had once been his inspiration, Mark knew one thing for certain: the experiment had worked. But the real test was just beginning, creating a world where no one had to go unnoticed. Where everyone, no matter their circumstances, would have a chance to be seen. And with that, Mark's journey ended, not with a single success, but with the ongoing work of creating a future where compassion and empathy shaped the way society treated its most vulnerable. His experiment had ignited a spark that would continue to burn brightly for generations to come.